Hey guys, Tom itself here, continuing my mini-series on gunplay and aiming in Call of Duty and Battlefield. And I want to try and rationalize why I can feel like such an aimbot in Call of Duty and sometimes such a noob in Battlefield. In the previous video, I gave an overview of the gunplay mechanics in both series. If you're not familiar with those, you should go back and watch the first video so the rest of this makes sense. A few of the comments on the previous video, I believe it was Aardvark, very aptly pointed out that in Battlefield your sights don't move around quite as much, but the bullets don't go where you're aiming because of that random bullet spread. Whereas in Call of Duty, the gun and the sights bounce around a whole lot, so the bullets also don't go quite where you're aiming. It's just for slightly different reasons between the two games. And I think we should spend this video talking about aim. Back in Black Ops 1, I did a video on a very similar topic. It was long, rambling, and lacked a lot of specifics, more general advice. So this time, I'm going to more get to the point and then get into the specifics. You can never beat your reaction time. You can try to speed it up, but it's always there. Usually about a quarter second for visual input for you mortals, maybe a bit faster for audio. A strategist or a tactician might talk to you about OODA loops, but with my background, I approach it more as a problem for fine motor skills related to control theory. It's a bunch of math, mostly electrical or chemical engineering kind of field. See Wikipedia if you want more. But if you start with an observation, in this case where you're aiming and where your target is, and decide you want to change it, it'll take at least as long as your reaction time to start changing what you're doing based on what you've seen. Okay, a quarter second isn't that long, and sticks are simple, right? If the guy is further away, just push further in the direction and let off as you get closer, right? Sure, that generalization works if you're okay with being slow, possibly or probably missing horribly. Let's face it though, this is how noobs aim. The guys over there, pull the stick further that way. Getting close, let off of it. That it's slow and imprecise. If you're too aggressive with the thumbsticks, you'll overshoot and be off target. You have to come back the other way. Too slow and it takes too long to get there, or worse yet, with a moving target, you'll just end up trailing behind. The ideal is that you obviously just correctly predict the path of your target and aim correctly, but for new players, the suggestion is to try to get just ahead of a moving target and let them run through the bullets. So obviously predicting where players are going, how they're going to move is an important part of the problem, but what I want to focus on in this video is essentially the other half of that, and that is if you do know where the guy is going to be and how he's going to react, and it's also going to come down to how your weapon recoil is going to act, what do you have to do with the thumbstick to make that happen, to get on target? That is knowing how your thumbsticks or your mouse is going to react. And yeah, it's a lot of hand-eye coordination and getting used to the controller sensitivity. And at this point, yeah, I'm going to be talking mostly about console controllers because, well, they're trickier and that's what I have more experience with. Alright, so we need a very good idea how thumbstick movements get turned into screen movements. Sounds simple, but it isn't. There is no standard. Each developer gets to decide how they want to approach the problem. And guess what? They usually take different methods. Toysrme has put together a very good report on this topic, including specifics on how many different FPS games have done this, and some recommendations on what make the best choices. You'll find a link to that in the video description, and I'll be referencing that report quite a few times in this video. Developers seem to find a solution though and stick with it for the most part. Call of Duty 4 to present uses the same look system, save for one small, very odd change in Black Ops 2. As does Battlefield, as best I can tell, all the way from Bad Company to Battlefield 3. But the thing is, the two series are different, and this can make switching between the games feel kind of odd. So let's talk about those differences. One of the first decisions a developer has to make is how large the dead zone should be. The dead zone is the spot where the stick is in the middle and nothing happens. Too small and the player won't be able to keep the view still. The sticks are cheap and often won't spring back to the exact center, especially if your controller's a few years old. Got a few of those around. Too large and the useful area goes unused, giving less range of motion on the thumbstick that can be used for actual aiming, and the game can feel sluggish, unresponsive, and kind of sticky even. And you'd also have to make large movements through a large center dead zone to change directions. Next, you have the minimum speed, that is how fast you're going when you get just past that dead zone. Yeah, obviously, this varies somewhat based on the sensitivity that the player selects, but the developer has to set this somewhere. So, what is the finest movement you can possibly make with your controller in-game? And then, how does that ramp up as you pull the thumbstick further over? How does it get faster and faster? This is normally exponential, and that's best. But again, it's another choice the developer gets to make, and all the way up to what is the maximum speed when the thumbstick hits the side of the controller? How fast is that? In this video, I'm going to leave out stuff like diagonal correction and aim assist. Check out the report if you want that. But, let's get on with the comparison between games here. First, dead zones. The report tells us that Call of Duty has a 20% dead zone in the middle there. Battlefield has a 30%. And honestly, Battlefield, it's unnecessarily large. There's no reason for it. It's detrimental. So let's talk about the minimum movement speed. Now, this is kind of hard to tell at first, but I am just going to go in here. My current sensitivity in Black Ops 2 is at 7 from 1 through 14, and I'm just going to push the stick just as far as I can, just get a little bit of movement. And you will barely be able to see it move, but if I hold it here for a couple seconds, you will notice that yes, I am slowly turning. I'm not going to wait to measure it because it would be tricky, but there is the ability for some incredibly fine movement in Call of Duty. And moving over into Battlefield 3, check out my sensitivity, just under half, about what it was in Call of Duty. So, just a loose comparison of what I'm using between the two games right now. Well, we'll see this. You can go to the report if you want to see the minimum and maximum options, but just here, what we're seeing, and that is that the minimum movement speed here is still pretty fast. It seems a little sticky, like I gotta push it so far over, and then I can let it back and it'll slow down a bit. But for the most part, it's significantly faster than it is in Call of Duty, and that makes fine adjustments in Battlefield 3 harder than it is in Call of Duty. The game where you would want more fine control over your aim, it's harder to do that because you don't have that super fine aiming capability. And you just gotta go back the other way. And yeah, I can't make that 1 or 2 pixel at a time adjustment. And yeah, it's there, but it's a lot harder to get. I don't know. Again, I feel like there's something that I have to push it past some point to get it unstuck, and then I can let off of it a little bit. It's still tricky, and part of that is that larger dead zones that have less space to work with, so they can't give you quite the range of speeds. Alright, that was minimum speed. Let's talk about maximum speed. It's a little less important, but again, it's nice to know what you have. Yeah, okay, so this test is even simpler. I'm just going to throw the thumbstick over as far as I can and see how long it takes to make a 360. In Call of Duty, my current sensitivity settings, it's a little under a second. Let's stop before I get dizzy, okay? And do Battlefield. And that's going to take a little more than a second per 360. I went back and counted frames after I recorded this. Next, let's talk about that sensitivity option in both games. And well, just like how both games have different curves for input to amount of turn you do, the sensitivity slider does different things. So it should be fairly obvious that you can't get the same control characteristics in both games. There is no combination of sensitivity settings that will let you get there. It's just not going to happen. The games are going to feel different. Before we get into the differences, let me say that while I might make some recommendations, if you have something that's working for you, just stick with it. It's not to say you shouldn't consider turning your sensitivity up or down and seeing what happens if you can still control it, or if you end up with better precise movement. No, try it, see what happens, but if you have something that's working for you, stick with it. That is really, because the most important thing is really just getting really comfortable with the sensitivity of those thumbsticks. Now, obviously, the biggest thing that sensitivity option is going to do is, as you increase the sensitivity, a smaller movement on the thumbstick is going to result in a more dramatic movement in-game. However, in Call of Duty, it will also increase the minimum movement speed. Thankfully, in Battlefield, it doesn't do that. In fact, the report shows that there's a slight reduction in minimum movement speed, though it's so small I personally can't test it. But it will not increase the minimum movement speed in Battlefield, which is really useful. So, what does that mean you should be doing? I kind of hate to say it, but the increase in minimum movement speed in Call of Duty is still fairly minor. You're still on the range of what Battlefield has, and so unless you plan on making a lot of fine adjustments, it may not be an issue in Call of Duty, and just find a sensitivity that's comfortable for you. In Battlefield, as I think I noted earlier, the range from the minimum to maximum tends to be less than that of Call of Duty, just part of that having a slightly larger dead zone. That's just how they do it. But what it means is that at the lower sensitivities, the maximum movement speed is fairly slow and is really, really sluggish. And so I would avoid the low ends, because unless you just can't control the thumbstick well enough, I mean, I'd like to be able to turn around in under 2 seconds, but that's kind of tricky in Battlefield on the really low sensitivities. So if you're on a super low sensitivity in Battlefield, you might kick it up a notch or two, because you're not going to lose that much in terms of the minimum movement speed, which is probably, the area that's you want to really fine. Anyway, try stuff, see what works. Finally, the thumbstick extenders, the control freaks, I think they're called. I can definitely see where they might be useful in Call of Duty. I'm not quite so sure with Battlefield, with the larger dead zone and that minimum movement speed, but, well, whatever works for you. Still, if you're used to using them in Call of Duty, like them there, and Battlefield just isn't working for you, you might try it without the thumbstick extenders. Just a thought. I've found that it takes me several hours of playing each time I switch games to get comfortable again with the thumbsticks, to the point where I'm not overcorrecting or doing strange stuff. Anyway, that's my experience. I hope this was useful for you guys. Next time we're going to get some more aiming mechanics and some tips and some more ways the games are similar and different. Anyway, thanks for sticking around. Hope you found something useful, and I'll see you next time.